The hall of Duskmore Court was built to make people feel small. Its ceilings rose higher than the tallest pine trees in the northern woods, and its stone walls were carved with the faces of wolves long dead, watching everything with cold, hollow eyes. Every year, on the night of the royal presentation, hundreds of wolves gathered beneath those carved faces to be judged. Alara Voss stood at the very back of the line, wearing a plain gray dress that had been mended so many times it barely held its shape. She was 22 years old, and this was the 7th time she had stood in this same spot, waiting for the same result. Nothing. The presentation was simple in theory. Each young wolf stepped forward, called on their inner wolf, and let it rise before the court so the Alpha King could judge their strength, their bloodline, and their place in the pack. Strong wolves earned titles. Weak wolves earned pity. And wolves like Alara, who showed nothing at all, earned silence, followed by whispers. "There's the nobody again," someone murmured behind her. 7 years and still nothing. Why does she even bother coming? Alara kept her eyes forward and said nothing. She had learned long ago that arguing only made the mocking louder. Better to endure it quietly, the way she endured most things in her life. She had grown up in the servant quarters of the royal keep, raised by an old woman named Nan, who was not her real mother, but had never let her feel that difference. Alara's parents had died when she was small, in a fire that no one liked to talk about. She barely remembered their faces. What she remembered was the ash smell that clung to Nan's coat the night she carried Alara away, and the way Nan had whispered, "Stay quiet, little one. Stay hidden, it's safer that way." She had never understood why hiding was safer. She only knew that it had become a habit, like breathing. At the front of the hall, seated on a throne carved from black stone, was Alpha King Draven Ashgrave. He was young for a king, only 28, but the weight of his crown had aged something in his eyes. He watched each wolf step forward with a most expression that rarely changed, not cruelty exactly, but a kind of distant coldness, as if he had decided long ago that most people would disappoint him, and was simply waiting to be proven right. Beside him sat Lady Seraphine, dressed in deep blue silk, her golden wolf mark glowing faintly on her wrist. She was widely expected to become his mate. She smiled at the crowd with practiced grace, though her eyes flicked often toward Draven, checking, calculating. One by one, the wolves stepped forward. Some summoned strong, proud animals that made the crowd murmur in approval. Others struggled and only managed a flicker of fur before giving up, bowing their heads in shame. The king nodded at the strong ones and looked away from the weak ones, as if they were not worth the effort of his attention. Then it was Alara's turn. She walked forward slowly, aware of every eye in the hall following her. Her boots made a soft sound against the stone floor, the only sound in a hall that had gone strangely quiet, the way a crowd goes quiet before something it expects to be embarrassing. She stopped where she was told to stop, and looked up at the throne. Draven's gaze settled on her, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. He had seen her here before, every year, standing in this same place, failing in this same way. "Name," he said, though he already knew it. It was tradition to ask. "Alara Voss, your majesty." "Show us your wolf, Alara Voss." She closed her eyes, the way she always did, and reached inward, searching for the presence that others described. A warmth, a pull, a second heartbeat living beside their own. She had been told her whole life that it was there, buried somewhere, waiting. She had spent years trying to coax it out, in private, in secret, late at night when no one could see her fail. Nothing came, as always. She opened her eyes, and the silence in the hall had shifted into something sharper, more amused. She heard a few soft laughs from the nobles near the front. Draven's jaw tightened. He was tired of pageantry, tired of nobles competing for his favor, tired of a crown that felt heavier every year. And when he looked at Alara standing there, empty-handed again, something old and bitter rose up in him, a memory he rarely let surface. Years ago, before he was king, before his father died and left him this throne too soon, there had been another quiet girl, a servant's daughter, unranked, dismissed by everyone at court, including him. He had underestimated her, and that mistake had cost his family everything, had cost him the people he loved most, in a betrayal so deep it still visited him in his sleep. He had sworn, after that night, that he would never again be fooled by someone who hid their true nature behind a mask of weakness. He did not know that Alara had nothing to do with that old wound. He only knew that looking at her made something old and painful rise in his chest, and he let it out the way he always did, coldly and without mercy. "A nobody," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. 7 years, and still nothing. Tell me, Alara Voss, why do you keep returning to waste this court's time? You are not a wolf. You are barely worth the name you carry. The words landed like physical blows. Alara felt her face grow hot, her throat tighten. She had been called weak before, called useless, called a waste. But never so plainly, never in front of so many people, never by the king himself. She wanted to run. Every instinct told her to bow her head, apologize, and disappear back into the crowd where she belonged. But something in her, something buried so deep she had never felt it before, refused. It was not anger. Not exactly. It was older than anger. It felt like a hand reaching up from beneath still water, breaking the surface after years of silence. Her heart began to pound, not with fear this time, but with something else, something building. "I am not nothing," she whispered, so quietly that only the people nearest to her heard it. Draven's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Alara lifted her chin. Her whole body was trembling, but her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I said I am not nothing." A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the hall. No one spoke back to the Alpha King. No one, especially not a nameless servant girl who had never once shown a wolf. Draven rose slightly from his throne, irritation flashing across his face. "You dare." He never finished the sentence. A light began to glow beneath Alara's skin, faint at first, like a candle behind thin cloth, and then brighter, spreading from her chest outward until it lit the space around her in soft silver. The crowd gasped and stumbled backward. Even the guards along the walls straightened, hands moving instinctively to their weapons, though none of them understood what they were seeing. Alara gasped as the warmth spread through her, a heat that did not burn but comforted, like coming home after being lost for years. The second heartbeat she had searched for her entire life suddenly beat strong and steady beside her own, as if it had simply been waiting for the right moment, the right words, to wake up. Her body began to change, but not in the way the court was used to seeing. Fur rippled across her arms, but it shimmered silver white, catching the torchlight like moonlight on snow. Her eyes, when she opened them again, glowed a soft, ancient gold, the color of old stories and forgotten history. The wolf that rose from her was not large in the way some of the noble wolves had been. It did not roar or snarl or posture. It simply stood, calm and radiant, and somehow that calm was more powerful than any display of aggression could have been. The air in the hall seemed to grow heavier, charged with something old and important. Draven felt it before he understood it, a pull deep in his chest, an instinct in his own wolf that made him want to lower his head. He fought it, confused and unsettled, gripping the arms of his throne. "What is this?" Lady Seraphine breathed, her hand rising to her throat. An old man near the front of the hall, Elder Mabon, keeper of the pack archives, a man rarely seen outside his tower of dusty books and older records, stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Impossible," he whispered. "That mark, that light, I have only seen it drawn in the oldest texts." "Explain yourself, Elder," Draven demanded, his voice tighter than he intended. Mabon turned to face the court, his hands trembling slightly. "Your Majesty, the histories speak of the first wolves, the ones who guarded this land before the royal bloodline ever existed. Their power did not announce itself with size or strength. It announced itself with light, with calm, with a presence that could not be denied. I always believed that bloodline extinct, wiped out generations ago." He looked at Alara, and his voice grew softer, "But I believe I was wrong." Draven stared at Alara, at the silver light still glowing softly around her, at the golden eyes that held no anger, despite everything he had said to her, only moments before. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Pieces began to shift into place. Old rumors about a fire in the servant quarters over 20 years ago. A fire that had conveniently erased records no one ever spoke of again. A fire his own father had once mentioned in a low, guarded voice, warning him never to ask about it. "The fire," he said slowly. "The one that took her parents." Mabon nodded gravely. "I believe, Your Majesty, that fire was set to hide her bloodline, not to end it. Someone protected her, by making the world believe she was nothing at all." The hall had gone utterly silent. Every noble who had laughed moments before now stood frozen, unsure whether to bow or flee. Lady Seraphine's composed expression cracked for just a moment, fear and calculation flashing behind her eyes, before she smoothed it away again. "This is absurd," she said quickly. "A servant girl, suddenly claiming ancient blood? It's clearly some trick, some spell to gain favor. I did not ask for this," Elara said, and her voice, though quiet, carried through the hall with unexpected strength. "I did not ask to be laughed at for 7 years, and I am not asking for anything now, except to be seen as I truly am." She looked directly at Draven, and for the first time since she had entered the hall, she did not look away. "You called me a nobody," she said. "You have called me that in some form every year I have stood before you. I believed it, for a long time. I believed there was truly nothing inside me worth seeing. But I was wrong, and so were you." Draven felt something shift in his chest, an old wall cracking. He remembered every year she had stood before him, silent and small, and how he had dismissed her without a second thought, too wrapped up in his own old wounds to see the person standing in front of him. He stepped down from his throne slowly, the entire court watching in stunned silence as their king approached the servant girl he had mocked only minutes before. "I judged you before I understood you," he said, his voice quieter now, meant almost only for her, though the whole hall could hear. "I let old anger speak instead of reason. That was wrong of me, and I am sorry for it." Ilara's wolf light dimmed slightly, softening from a fierce glow into something gentler as her breathing steadied. "Words are easy to say," she said. "I have heard many words in this hall tonight." "Then let my actions speak instead," Draven said. He turned to face the court, raising his voice so every noble, every guard, every servant standing in the shadows could hear him clearly. "Elara Voss carries the blood of the first wolves, guardians older than this throne itself. From this day she will be recognized not as a nobody, but as a daughter of an ancient and honored line. Anyone who speaks against her speaks against this crown." Lady Seraphine opened her mouth to protest, but Draven's sharp glance silenced her before she could form the words. Slowly, one by one, the nobles who had laughed only minutes ago began to bow their heads, some out of genuine respect, others simply because they understood, quickly, which way the wind had changed. Elder Mabon bowed deepest of all, relief and wonder mixing on his weathered face. Elara looked around the hall that had mocked her for 7 long years, now bent low before her, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not pride exactly, something quieter and steadier than that. Peace, perhaps, or the first taste of belonging she had ever truly known. Draven remained standing before her, closer now than a king usually stood to anyone, his earlier coldness replaced by something curious and unguarded. "I don't expect you to forgive me tonight," he said quietly, "but I would like the chance to earn it, if you'll allow me." Elara studied him for a long moment, the silver light around her fading gently, until only her steady gold eyes remained, calm and clear. "Perhaps," she said, "one day." It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was not a closed door either, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elara Voss walked out of that hall not as a nobody hiding in the shadows, but as herself, finally seen, finally whole, with an ancient light still humming quietly beneath her skin, waiting patiently for whatever came next.